Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is a blogger and internet person who goes by the name DougJ. Doug, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, it's great to be here. I'm DougJ. I used to write at Balloon. I still write at Balloon Juice, but not as often as I used to, and I mostly am a Twitter person now.
Yeah, Balloon Juice is. I mean, that goes back to the early days of the blogosphere. So you've been in the trenches for a long time.
I joined Balloon Juice in fall of 2008, I think, right after Obama won the election.
Mm-hmm. A different time, a simpler time. But so we're not going to be reminiscing about the glory days of the blogosphere today. We're going to be talking about a project. I don't know. Would you call it a project? I don't know.
I'd call it a project. Yeah, in the sense that it's sort of a persona, but it's also like a group project. And then the sense that I got a lot of the things that I write and stuff from the replies or people DM me and so on.
Okay.
And
it's called NYT Pitchbot or York Times Pitchbot.
NYT Pitchbot. I really liked that Jeff Jarvis parody guy. He's changed his name a couple of times.
Yes, I know you're talking about. That was is he? I haven't seen him as much as.
No, he's kind of slowed down.
Yeah,
so
Jeff Jarvis was sort of an evangelist of like online media and stuff, and then someone made a parody account that was maybe called Real Jeff Jarvis. I can't even remember, but
it's gone through a couple of name changes.
Yeah, I think he's been banned a couple times, but it was someone making fun of this persona and always saying like, something good was going to happen anytime there was some like development that seemed bad in terms of online media and news and so forth, and always being like way too optimistic about what was going to.
And it was always sort of mocking this obsession that a certain kind of tech evangelist type people have about the next thing. How like every Twitter is 2007, and now it's the time for Peach or Medium or what. I can't even remember what half of them were.
Yeah,
that was the first. That was probably the first Twitter account that I really liked. So like I wasn't really a Twitter person. Then I found that account and I really thought it was hilarious. And it was for a long time. It was probably the only Twitter account that I read at all.
Okay. Yeah. So how did this start? And when did it actually start that you?
I can't remember. I think that was about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
I was on Twitter. So kind of what happened was that I felt like I had less and less time during the day to actually blog, because blogging might take me 20 minutes to hammer out a post, and I have a toddler that I'm watching a lot of the time, and I don't really have breaks of that magnitude. However, I frequently do have breaks of a minute or two, whether I want them or not. I'm in some form of a timeout for not putting the mag tiles up in the right order or something like that, and so I wanted to have some kind of creative outlet, for those minute or two breaks that I had. And I enjoy the kind of give and take of Twitter. And I was sort of hunting around for trying to do something amusing. And then, as I said, my initial introduction to Twitter was really that Professor Jarvis parody persona. And then I started to really like Reason Pitchbot and Federalist Pitchbot. And I started to read them all the time. And I thought, this is really funny. I want to do something kind of like that, because I think there's not enough of that.
Okay, so explain what are, for people who are not on Twitter, I think Federalist Pitchbot retired.
Yeah, and Reason Pitchbot did too, I think.
Okay, they were more Trump era things. But I mean, it's sort of self-explanatory. Parodies of, ultra hard right, headlines and lines from articles, or for, Federalist and Reason to be like libertarian, like a parody of libertarian.
Yeah. So Reason Pitchbot was, I would describe it as a very gentle parody of Reason. It was very funny. It wasn't really that hard on Reason. It sort of had this idea that the ideal Reason reader is someone living in his mom's basement playing video games and smoking pot all day, which is a pretty generous interpretation of the whole thing based on what I believe actual Reason readers are like.
That's probably at least a subsection of their audience.
Yeah. It's the basically benign subsection. The ones that aren't into Peter Thiel and the ones that aren't anti-vaxxing or whatever.
Okay, so you're working within a tradition that has been somewhat established among, sort of not weird Twitter exactly, but parody Twitter, media Twitter. Yeah. And then, so then you started New York Times Pitchbot. So I don't think we actually said this. If you want to follow this account, you have to. It's still your original account. It's DougJ Balloon, and the link to that will be below. But you mostly inhabit this persona, for the posts. And okay, so do you have like a one-line description of what the theme of the account is?
Parodying the New York Times. Specifically the headlines, I would say, because when I look through the New York Times, I don't like that much in the opinion section. It's gotten better maybe since James Bennett left. And there's some really stupid articles too, don't get me wrong. But a lot of what I don't like is actually the headlines, that they have this really formulaic way of I think it's basically clickbait, but except it's clickbait before clickbait, because they did it before the internet existed. This thing where they can't just say scientists say vaccines are good. It has to be scientists say vaccines are good. Are they right? Or something like that. Everything has to be, because otherwise I understand the reason. Otherwise people won't read it. They'll just say like, well, I knew vaccines were good already. I'm not going to read that article. But if it's, if they bring in, if you think like, is it really right? And then they have Brett Weinstein talk about how they're bad for a couple of paragraphs or something like that in there. Even if they shoot it down completely, I think somehow they think that makes a more engaging experience for readers, or it maybe just makes people click on it. As I said, though, I don't think it's 100% just a clickbait thing, because they did do it before the internet existed. And I think it might just be an obsession with being so neutral that you can't, even a basic scientific fact can't be stated as fact, because what about the 0.1% of the population that disagrees?
Okay, so it's sort of both sides-ism, which is something that people who are like the early liberal blogosphere was very critical of.
Both sides-ism, but also kind of general head up its ass, wealthy people living in the New York City area, that kind of thing too.
So you parody the Times, so you go further than the Times, because you're making fun of Cillizza, Glenn Greenwald. We'll talk a little bit of those sort of things. So it's some way the Times is the what's the word, synecdoche for the larger media, like center liberal media sphere. And this group has certain pathologies. And so one of them would be like, we need to hear both sides. And I mean, this in many ways, like Blogging Heads in its original form was sort of a version of that, hearing like putting two people who didn't agree in conversation and letting them each have their say. So and it's, as a general sort of thing, it's better to hear from, I think it's generally good to hear from both sides, but then, when one side becomes totally insane, as many, there's some percentage of the population who believe that Donald Trump is actually still the secret president. And so you need to make some sort of value judgment as a news editor of whether you take that seriously or not.
I think I have an even bigger problem with the both sidesing thing, which is almost more, I don't know, philosophical is the word, but why this whole thing of just trying to shoehorn every discussion into two battling sides? I find it ridiculous. There's lots of things that are not even political, right? Where there's five sides, or, everybody really agrees except a few crackpots. I just think it's very simplistic to want to shoehorn everything into this two sides thing. And I actually think that although a lot of both sidesing is I think, and it begins maybe as an effort to seem neutral or be centrist or or like what's the word I'm looking for? But to be less polarizing, I guess. But I think in a lot of ways the net effect is to polarize, because in fact you're insisting on taking every issue and presenting it as two competing sides when that really does not fit every issue. There's lots of issues where basically people agree, or no one really knows, and there's 5 different opinions, or things like that. And so it's not just that I dislike it during the Trump era. I don't like it as just I don't like it as such a heavy-handed rhetorical device, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, the Times, sees itself, and many other people see it as the paper of record. And it's stuck between trying to be voice from nowhere. That's another sort of critique. I think Jay Rosen came up with that term.
The view from nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah. View from nowhere. A pose of neutrality, and above it all, seeing everything and laying it all out there, and you can decide, sort of thing. But I guess maybe some, a postmodernist or something would say that that's impossible, and everyone's like reality is filtered through their position in society and the power structure and so forth. But most of the people, I assume most of the people who are writers and editors of the New York Times are basically, mainstream Democrats. And so when they have to do this both sides thing, it's not like, it's sort of like talking to the, it's like, oh, let's talk to the Martians and see what they think about this.
Yeah, right.
So one of the ways you parody that is in This Ohio Diner, which is one of your running jokes. I think is very funny. Do you see that as the connection? And can you talk about This Ohio Diner?
Yeah. So I live in Rochester, New York, which I think is officially part of flyover country.
Oh, I actually used to live in Rochester, New York.
Oh, really?
Yes, I lived in Rochester and Irondequoit, but we can talk about that later.
Okay. Yeah. And I grew up in upstate New York in a quite rural area. And these articles where they go to diners in Ohio, they've always rubbed me the wrong way, because I think that they're extremely condescending to the people in these diners. I don't think they've spent a lot of time there. And I think it's like you said, it's like these are these idiot Martians who voted for Trump. And there's always an underlying assumption, right? They never go to an Ohio diner and ask people what they think of Medicare for all and have them all say, yeah, we'd like it. It's never, the people are never, ever, ever, ever taking a liberal or progressive view on things. They're always loving Trump, despite the fact that Trump killed half their family, or, you know what I mean? Or they'd like to support Biden, but the thing they care most about is Bull Simpson, so they can't quite pull the trigger. It's always, always, always bad news for Democrats in some form or another. Yeah. And also the people are always stupid, right? It's never like they never say something like, oh, my insurance forms are so damn complicated. Why can't we have a single payer that would make it easier? They're never saying anything very incisive. They're always saying stupid things. They're always saying things that are, somewhere between conservative and centrist. And I don't think it's accurate. And I also think that whole form of reporting is bad. I think that if they want to talk to people in Ohio diners, maybe find a reporter in Ohio that really knows these people and knows where they're coming from. I'm not saying that he or she would, have a more generous view of these people or something like that, but at least it would be a better informed one that sounded less, that was more difficult to parody.
Right. And so there was sort of, I feel like the in This Ohio Diner got so much pushback during the early part of the Trump administration that I think it became too embarrassing for journalists to do this anymore. And then maybe during COVID, people weren't, gathering in diners anyway. But so there's a very clear critique of this sort of thing, which is, the reporter drops into some small town and wants to talk to people. So they go to the diner, and who is eating at a diner in the middle of the day? It's usually retirees and, people who aren't working a lunch shift. Obviously, I guess you could talk to the employees at the diner. And so if you go into some small town and talk to, and go to the diner to try to get some local color for your story, you're probably talking to 67-year-old
Yeah.
retired insurance salesman or something who gets his lunch there every day. And so you're already like self-selecting a certain
right. But I also
person.
suspect that it's like jury selection, right? They probably throw out anybody that seems too intelligent, you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I mean, so there's like a lazy form of journalism would be like, okay, I got to do a piece, let's say the election is coming up. I got to go to some swing county in a swing state and find some quotes. And I basically know what the story is going to say. I just need to plug the quotes in. And then, I can like sort of clock out early and that'll be that. So there's certainly, that's like the lazy way to do it.
I think but I mean, my guess is there probably are people they meet in these diners who are actually interested in some issue, right? In some nerdy kind of way. And I don't think that that doesn't really make for a good quote, right? I mean, I think if there is someone in the diner that, I don't know, keeps track of quarterly GDP or something like that and says something intelligent about that to them, that wouldn't really make a good quote,
Right. So I'm scrolling through your feed. I'm scrolling through your feed to look for some of these. So one example, July 4th, in this Ohio diner, no one pays taxes on the college tuition their employer provides for their grandchildren. So the viewers and listeners can get the flavor. But I mean, also just think about this, like, a lot of this is a very large country with a lot of people in it, and a number of those people are sort of strange and have unusual beliefs. And so if you actually just went and talked to random people about politics, like the things they said would probably be more like weird and wouldn't fit into a normal schema of left right. Like you probably have someone saying like, I don't like that Joe Biden because it looks like his hair is fake or something.
Right. Yeah. You'd get a lot of things like that. Yeah.
Or things that crossed ideological lines in confusing ways that didn't, fit into the left, right, red, blue thing of being like, I'm trying to just make one up on the spot, but like, people who, love Joe Biden because they like, think he was like a World War II war hero or something like this. Most people don't pay close attention to politics and have sort of confused beliefs because they're like busy with their actual lives and like getting, picking their kids up for school. And that
yeah. I also don't like that it's always very white, the places that they go. I mean, it goes hand in hand with this whole mythology around the white working class, right? Whereas, when you look at actual statistics, African Americans and Latinos are more likely to identify as working class than white Americans. And yet this perpetuates this idea that the quote unquote real working class is white. Why don't they go to a black diner or a Latino diner or something like that? And of course the answer is that every now and then they do, almost never, but then they only go to have them undermine Biden in some way, right? If they go to a black diner, they'll say, "Oh, no one here wants to get vaccinated," or they'll say, or what they used to do was say, "Oh, no one here will ever come around on marriage equality," which turned out to be completely false. So every now and then they will go to some group that's not white, but then only to show that this supposedly liberal voting bloc really hates gay people or doesn't like vaccines or something silly like that.
Do you follow the work of Chris Arnott?
I do. I can't stand him.
Okay, that's interesting. I've had him on the show before, and I do.
It's poverty porn to me.
Okay, that's definitely an understandable critique. I mean, he sort of does some version of this. He's not, he travels, or at least before the pandemic, he would travel the country, go to some place that is, sort of on the edges of, a city. And he said, so the first thing he said you would always do is go to McDonald's. And so that's sort of a version of the diner, but maybe he has said there's almost always some sort of elderly like coffee group at like every McDonald's he goes to, where like the men would like gather at 6 a.m. to drink coffee. And at McDonald's, maybe one other difference is they'll usually let you sit there unmolested if you like buy one food item for as long as you want, clean bathrooms, clean Wi-Fi. But I think he talks to people, and just the things they say just don't fit into the this is where I'm thinking more like people will just say something strange, like, they like Joe Biden's hair or they don't like Joe Biden's hair. Like, just people have, their beliefs are more unusual than.
His are better in that they're less predictable. I still don't like them, though, because I still feel like he's always pushing this certain narrative. I feel like that, well, no wonder people voted for Trump or something like that, Mm-hmm. And that's what I don't like that about it. And also at the end of the day, and I don't mean this as like a huge disparagement of his work, because, it's interesting that he's doing it. I just don't know if I really think that kind of thing would ever be as interesting as if you actually had someone who lived in the community, a journalist from the community, undertake something similar and talk about people instead. It still has this rich white person on safari aspect to it that I just don't really like.
Right. And so the person looks sort of like metaphorically parachuting in and spending 72 hours and then leaving and writing something and sharing it with the people.
Yeah. And someone who's not from the community, someone who's much wealthier and better educated than any of the people that he's talking to. I don't know. It's just something about that whole. Probably whoever wrote this stuff, if it was a local journalist, that would also be someone who was more educated than a lot of the people that he or she was talking to. But I don't know. It would feel less like a rich white person safari.
Right. Yeah. And so the, in one respect, the internet enables a local reporter or a local non-reporter to, gather, reporting quotes, information from their area and share it with the larger world. And that wouldn't have been possible 30 years ago because it just would have, if it was published at all, it just would have been like in the local paper. But at the same time, the internet has made it so that local news is totally hollowed out. And, the local paper, if it still exists, is like a shell of its former self. And so you would have to think like it would have to be someone who is maybe, I don't know, someone who got laid off from the local paper, decided to just like do an independent project or something.
I just think the New York Times could farm it out. I think they could talk to some local paper and say, hey, do you have a journalist who'd like to work with us on this piece? And who actually knows the people, who knows the background, who knows, who knows how to maybe have an article about people that treats them with some dignity. That's sort of my thing at the end. Is I don't think any of this stuff. I don't think it treats the subjects with the dignity that I would like to see.
Mm-hmm. And coincidentally or not, Dignity is the title of the book that Arnady produced, based on his interviewing and photographs.
But I don't think that his work actually does give people that much dignity.
Okay, that's interesting. So, and the Times has become the de facto national paper because of these trends of the local papers getting hollowed out, and then the Times received this influx of subscribers and views during the Trump administration. And so you could imagine the Times deciding that they want to do a project of, seating local bureaus in various places drawn from people. So remember they sent the youngest Sulzberger, they sent him to be like the Kansas City bureau chief for a couple of years as his like testing ground, and then he left and now he's the publisher or whatever. They could, instead of doing that, the scion of the company that, or the family that owns the paper, they could hire the young journalism graduate from the local state school or the people who had been laid off by the hollowed out the hollowing out of the paper that had been bought by big capital or whatever.
They could do something like that, and just something also that just didn't have to frame every issue into every issue. Before it's written, the framing is already, this place is a depressing hellhole, and the people here are morons who vote for Trump.
Right.
And or alternatively, morons who used to be Democrats but are so upset about Biden's failure to embrace Bull Simpson that or they care so much about the filibuster that they're willing to They're willing to vote for a Republican. They're all kind of pre-framed like that. I feel like,
Right. And so, yeah, it's the Ohio Diner thing is like, these salt of the earth people, they don't know, they don't know much about like critical race theory, but they do know one thing.
Right. Yeah. And I really don't like that way of looking at people. And that's part of why I like to do the ones where the twist is that they say some, they talk about Derrida or something like that. There's this, I'm a big fan of the show Cheers. And one of my all-time favorite episodes, Woody, the guy from Indiana, he wants to convince his parents that Boston isn't such a bad place. And so he asks Diane, the artsy grad student waitress, to make a movie. And she makes this movie, and she's been watching a lot of French New Wave films. So it's all, jump cuts and crazy stuff. And they send it to Woody's family. And he says to Diane, I'm sorry, the movie didn't convince them. And she said, well, it was probably a little over their heads. And then he said, well, mostly they thought it was too derivative of Godard. I always loved it because it was such a twist on wanting to look at these people as silly and unsophisticated in some way, and then the joke is that they're not. So I like to do a lot of jokes like that. Uh-huh. And they're not made to make fun of people. They're made to make fun of the stereotype that people who go to diners couldn't have sophisticated opinions about things.
Right. Okay. So you in your, the realm of parody for this account is both the sort of, that sort of news stuff, but also the opinion stuff. And, plenty of people have plenty of critiques of the New York Times opinion section, especially over the past couple of years. I've done whole episodes on this topic. So once again, I have to think that most of the people who work behind the scenes at the editorial page in the New York Times are like center left, liberal progressive types. But there's in clickbait terms, just driving the conversation or whatever. There's like, the counterintuitive take, like the old Slate pitch that Slate doesn't actually do anymore. And that's how, I guess, sort of how you get, the New York Times publishing Tom Cotton saying, send in the troops to break up the Black Lives Matter, protests / riots, whatever you want to call them. So there's plenty of. What do you think of the Times opinion page, and how do you see it, especially after Bennett got forced out about a year ago?
So I will tell you that over the past few years, my view of the New York Times opinion page has totally changed, in the sense that there are columnists who I really, really just made me crazy before, like David Brooks, who now, when I read him, he's mostly saying that Biden should go big and fight the filibuster and all the things that I agree with. And his arguments are pretty good about it, too. And that was always my view of the New York Times opinion page, with these sort of tepid centrists who ultimately come around backhandedly to supporting Republicans. And I think a lot of it was that way. But I think that when they hired Bari Weiss and the other guy, Brett Stevens, it just really kind of went off the deep end in a totally different way. Like, the problem was no longer, stupid, tepid centrism, though I do make fun of that. The problem was like truly insane things. I mean, I think Brett Stevens is mostly just very stupid and contrarian. I actually occasionally read those conversations with Gail Collins, and I find, much to my horror, that when it actually comes to who he'll vote for and what he thinks would be a good, strategy for Democrats, message-wise and stuff, I actually find that I usually agree with him. He's just very stupid, and he can't stop the contrarian stuff. But one thing that I think people really haven't fully absorbed was how awful it was for them to hire Bari Weiss. If you look at that article she wrote about the promoting the intellectual dark web, I mean, the people on there are insane, right? Brett Weinstein is an anti-vaxxer. Joe Rogan believes the moon landing was fake. I mean, it's lunacy. It's complete lunacy. And I think to take that world of lunacy, much of it very dangerous. Now, at the time, it was maybe less clear it was dangerous, right? Because we didn't have COVID yet. And to try to take all that stuff, which, and mainstream it into the New York Times was really terrible. And she's a complete fraud as well. I mean, I think that for me was when I just felt like this thing is completely broken. They deserve as much mockery as we can muster.
Yeah, I made this point a couple of years ago in an episode where I talked to David Cleon about the New York Times opinion section. This would have been like 2018 or so. But just the fact that Trump won, shocking many of the right thinking people in America, and then they decided to remedy this on the op-ed page by hiring an anti-Trump Republican neocon, former Wall Street Journal writer Brett Stevens, and bring Bari Weiss in to be an editor. It was just like they had two House conservatives, Brooks and Douthat, who I like both of them, and Douthat is the only regular. I guess Douthat and Michelle Goldberg are the only ones where I'll pretty much read automatically, no matter what the topic is these days. I think a lot of people hate Douthat for various reasons. I
like him. I like him too. I think that he's. Okay, I think he's thought. I don't really make fun. I make fun of him occasionally because sometimes he has that. He is a conservative Catholic, and they do things that are very funny. There's just something crazy about it.
He has a I think what sets him apart is, well, he's very smart, and but he definitely has some oddball beliefs. Yeah. But he actually does believe them, whereas often, I don't know, it comes from a genuine place, and so you sort of you get to see how he's thinking and so forth. And he is intellectually honest. But anyway, so they had two anti-Trump conservatives, and instead of as I said at the time, this is a country of 300 million people. Surely they could have found one pro-Trump columnist who could write a once or twice a week column for them. But instead, they brought in another anti-Trump conservative, which is 1 or 2% of the population at that point, representing them. So that just was a total misfire. And did they need more Mia Connery?
I don't think they needed a pro-Trump conservative. I think that
I think that would have been a smart move for them. And I don't who would that person have been is somewhat more difficult to think of. But roughly half the voting population chose Trump, so it would make sense to try to understand why that was from someone who. Sure,
but I think you could have somebody write about that who wasn't a pro-Trump conservative. You know what I mean? You could just. I think the idea is you could have someone maybe who lived in a part of the country where people were more pro-Trump or something like that, write about it, write about what he was seeing and so on, without the person actually being pro-Trump.
Right, and it's the fact that there's someone like Daniel McCarthy is maybe. There's only a couple names you could think of. Trying to find someone who is an intellectually honest Trump supporter is a difficult proposition.
Think there are any, right? The Washington Post hired this guy, Greg Abernathy, and they hired Hugh Hewitt, and they're both terrible. Abernathy's maybe not quite as bad. He lives in Iowa, and so at least there's some geographical diversity there. But in general, they're terrible. I think they add nothing.
Hewitt is full of shit. Abernathy, the name doesn't even. I don't even know who that is. It's funny how I've joked about this before on Twitter. How the New York Times op-ed is the only op-ed and opinion section that matters in the country. And at one point, I pulled out the Wall Street Journal, the screenshot of the Wall Street Journal opinion page listing all their columnists, and I said, how many of these names do you even recognize of who this person is? And I think I recognized 5 of 15. And I was being paid to follow the news at that point. No one, if you can name, just no one cares. It's just strange. No one cares about the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal opinion sections. But
the Wall Street Journal one is really bad. I mean, it's almost hard to really convey how bad it is. It's very, very, very poor. And I don't just mean because I don't agree with them. The quality is incredibly bad. They're very, very stupid people,
It's shock. I mean, you would think they could assemble a more impressive lineup. Oh, actually, I have it right here.
Well, I think most people who read newspapers are stupid too, and so I think it's a lot of op-eds to me. They're written by stupid people for stupid people.
That probably makes sense. Okay, yeah, I found this. We don't need to read them all, but like, Holman W. Jenkins, William McGurn, Mary Anastasia O'Grady, Jason Riley. Like, I don't know who these people are. I've never read a single thing they've written.
Jason Riley. He's the first one that you named that I've heard of, right?
James Freeman, Joseph Sternberg. These are not. Whereas everyone
still got Peggy Noonan, right?
Yes. So the ones who are Noonan and Walter Russell Mead. But other than that,
no, there's like maybe 4 of them that anybody's heard of.
Yes, in my joke, I said your Wall Street Journal opinion columnist number is the number of Wall Street Journal opinion columnists whose names you even vaguely recognize, and I said mine was 4. And William Galston and Kimberly Strassel were the other ones. But yeah, it's just funny because if we think that like Gail Collins and Brett Stevens are sort of like the B team, the New York Times opinion page, but we all like quote unquote know who those people are. And no one is arguing about Holman W. Jenkins's latest column.
I wouldn't have even guessed that was an opinion columnist. I would have thought that was maybe a Civil War general.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe a relief pitcher, something like that.
Yeah, it does. It's slightly reminiscent of T. Herman Zweibel, the fake publisher of The Onion from back in the day. But yeah, it is. So, the media class is totally obsessed with the New York Times opinion page in a way that's probably not healthy. And you can comment being someone who, mocks it for online for your hobby. But anyway, I do think they have done some good things. I mean, it's surprising they hired a number of people who sort of were early blogging heads type people. I mean, I
love Jamel Bowie.
They have Bowie, they have Ezra Klein, they have Michelle Goldberg, doubt that. Liz Brunig came and went, but they seem to make some good decisions. I mean, landing Ezra Klein, he certainly was a coup, and having him bring this very popular podcast there. But yeah, just getting someone who lives not in Washington or New York, that would be good. I mean, they used to have this guy. I don't think he does it anymore. They used to have this guy who would write sort of letters from the farm. Do you remember that guy?
Yeah, I think I kind of do. Right. Of course, the fact framing it as letters from the farm is problematic.
Right. And it was always about him looking at a chickadee or something.
Right. There's still this idea.
Verlin Klinkenborg. That's the person's name.
There's still a notion to me that if you're not living in the Sella corridor, you're kind of an eccentric who's mostly interested in looking at chickadees or something.
Right.
And I don't think that's very healthy either.
Yeah. So they could. I mean, they could
real serious lives outside of the Sella corridor too.
Yeah, so what they could do, I mean, so I think it's good that they hired Bowie. Actually, I mean, he lives in Charlottesville, I think, so that's just, somewhat outside the, it's not in the Sella corridor. Yeah. But, they could look for a writer for, the Rochester Democratic Chronicle, for example. Right. Just they take someone from sort of the, minor leagues and elevate them instead of, I mean, I like Michelle Goldberg a lot, but, she lives in Brooklyn and, she referred Slate in the Nation. So they could find people who are just outside of the media, within, who are writers, but are outside of the media elite.
Yeah. Or at least geographically outside of that. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot of, I think to be honest with you, it kind of goes to a larger issue with the New York Times. It's very parochial, right? And it treats everything outside of New York City and maybe DC, but really even just outside of New York City is some kind of a weird place, right? How they every now and then. So one of my all-time favorite bloggers and Twitter personalities is Atrios. I love Atrios. Atrios does, whenever the New York Times goes to Philadelphia, they write about it like they're on safari,
Yes, and there's a classic thing where every 18 months they discover things are happening in Los Angeles, and they'll do a story of it's sort of
LA. They treat LA with they're really trying to expand their West Coast coverage, so they treat LA with a certain amount of respect. When they go to Philadelphia, they say things like, "Wow, I didn't know there were restaurants in Philadelphia that serve sushi. This is kind of unique." They do. They really do. They really do treat Philadelphia like it was some weird fifth world backwater, you know?
Right.
And it's not politics. Usually, I don't know. Like a lot of the times, it's about food, right? Because Philly's kind of become a big food city, and so, but they write about it in this same weird way, you know?
Yeah, visiting like they're visiting Timbuktu or something.
Annoying. I say this as someone that loves New York. I lived in Brooklyn for a few years, and it's my favorite place. If I could afford to live in Manhattan, do what I do, that's what I would be living there. So it is cool. It's its own cool place, but it just gives them some huge blind spot about writing about other parts of the country.
Right. And I mean, you know, the New York Times has been located in New York, you know, for 130 years or something, or more than that. I think it was around during the Civil War, so 150 years or more. And, you know, the fact that it sort of became the de facto national, like it was called the paper of record 30 years ago and longer than that. But the fact that it's now the de facto national chronicle, like it can't help but be distorted by the fact that it is based in, you know, it is based in New York City. And, you know, when I grew up in a northern New Jersey suburb, so we got the New York Times, you know, delivered to us, the paper. And so I grew up with it. But if you know, grew up in, you know, Houston or something, there would be no reason for you to follow the New York Times. And now that I'm sure they have like a Houston bureau now, but yeah, it's just like the decimation of local news and the consolidation has put them in a difficult spot because they're not like the AP. They're something different. So,
but I think there is another issue too, which isn't just, I mean, it does come from living in New York, but it's not geographic per se, which is that I feel like when you read it, and this is actually different to me than 25 years ago, there's like an assumption that everybody reading it is very wealthy. You know, there's the constant references to brands and restaurants and things that are very upscale, you know, and then that awful thing. And I know why they do it. They have to get money for it. That awful real estate thing. What $3 million buys you in Louisville, Kentucky? I mean, I know why they do it. I know they do that because they make a lot of their money off real estate ads. And those are ways to make people look at real estate ads. And they got to make a buck. And it's not an easy business to make a buck in anymore. But it does overall create the image to the reader of a bunch of very wealthy, privileged people kind of wanking about what you know, people talk about white people problems. This is way beyond that. This is like,
I think they're
1%er problems. It seems
their main, you know, prejudice isn't exactly the right word. The tribe that they really represent is the wealthy, and the real estate and maybe the style and the food sections show that. And those columns where they, I think it's called The Hunt, that they run every weekend, and it's talking about someone looking for a new apartment in somewhere in New York City usually, and it's just like, you know, it'll be like a 27-year-old who worked at Goldman Sachs and his girlfriend who is, you know, a publicist for WeWork, and you know, their budget is $900,000, and it's just like,
can I use this pitch? I like them being a publicist for WeWork.
Sure, go. Yeah, that's you don't even need to credit me for that one, but yeah, it's just like this is so far outside even like the average within the New York City region. It's just like, it's essentially for rich people, and I assume that is their audience. Like, don't you think they're smart enough to know who their audience is?
Actually, I don't think that's their audience.
Okay.
I think, though, that it may be tied in with advertising money in the sense that, you know, I'm part of their audience and I'm not very wealthy, but I might not be what from the standpoint of advertising, I might be essentially worthless, right? Because I'm not gonna buy a $6 million house in Long Island, so they're not going to get any nice looking stuff from there.
Right. The ads, I don't look at the physical paper anymore, but the ads they serve online are often for luxury products.
And I think that might be what pays. So there's a side of it that really bothers me, right? There's a side of it that bothers me less because I do realize that's maybe, you know, it's unfortunate that online ads are not lucrative the way print ads were. And so maybe the only way to make money with the online ads is super high end stuff, and to get to make those ads make sense in the context of the article. Maybe the article has to be about. I'm not saying I know all this for a fact, but I'm willing to believe that maybe part of it is because that's how they make their money. I don't think that's all of it. So
yeah, and they're making more and more money from subscription revenue versus advertising revenue, because advertising online is sort of a race to the bottom, whereas a subscription, that's sort of solid money that'll keep on coming in if you keep that person happy and subscribing year after year. But that presents a different set of problems with like audience capture and and if you look at papers, this is obvious from 50 years ago, it's just like filled with ads for getting your watch fixed or yard sales and death announcements and that sort of thing. So that was a way, because they had this local monopoly. Advertising doesn't exist anymore, so everyone knows that story. Okay, I want to ask you, we're maybe approaching the end of our time, but I wanted to ask you about two of your, bête noirs of the column or of the feed, and so that would be Greenwald and Cillizza, mentioned previously. Cillizza has been the punching bag for years, at least a decade or more. Greenwald is more he's taken some interesting turns in the past couple of years. But what do you how do you view those two?
I think that they're both nihilists, and that's ultimately what I dislike the most, and that's part of what I try to parody in general and making fun of the New York Times. I'm not always trying to just make fun of conservatives or centrists or something. There's this nihilism, like, hey, 1 million people are dead, but what's the upside for Republic? There's that kind of
right.
And I think that Cillizza and Greenwald, in very different ways, are like the epitome of a certain kind of nihilism, right? Cillizza is the very worst on always taking a horse race angle, right? Also not really funny or clever. Like, I make fun of Maureen Dowd, too, but I will be honest with you, I think her pieces are kind of funny sometimes. I like them in some ways. They're awful, but Cillizza, it's just this pure, really, really stupid take on this really, really stupid horse race take. It's completely amoral, right? And also very stupid. I guess that's really what I should say. Is they're the epitome of the combination of nihilism and stupidity, right? And so that's why I make fun of them so much. I actually met Chris Cillizza once. He was actually very nice.
I'm sure he's charming in person. That's how he has all these sources.
I've had multiple email exchanges with Glenn Greenwald, and he's kind of a monster, right? I mean, I think there's really not. I don't think there's a really. Yeah,
he has. I've actually one of my few claims to fame is that I was like anti-Greenwald before it was cool, and he blocked.
I was very slow to adopt. I mean, this is maybe part. My obsession may partly be fueled by a feeling of being duped.
Yeah, he had a lot of fans on the from his early days, and people who really appreciated his Snowden WikiLeaks reporting. He blocked me on Twitter a couple of years ago, and so my joke is that it's sort of like Plato's cave when I'm trying to figure out what he did by like reading the emanations and the shadows on the wall from everyone being mad at his latest thing. But so he is. I mean, I don't think he's dumb. I think but he does seem more of a. I don't know. He maybe it is not a nihilist. He's definitely like put his picked a side and decided that it makes sense for him to pretend to be a like civil libertarian who goes on Tucker Carlson and has an honest conversation with Tucker Carlson instead of someone who Tucker Carlson is using for his own ends.
Well, I guess I say dumbest is I think his arguments are very dumb. Like when people will be joking about something Glenn Greenwald said, he also blocked me. And so I have to then go to my burner account to see what he actually said. And people are joking. And I'm like, that's so dumb. He didn't really say that. And then I'm like, oh my God, he really said that, He's really saying that, that Hunter Biden's paintings are as bad as all the things, or worse, actually, than anything that the Trump children ever did. And I feel like that's just stupid. I mean, not even right or left there. It's just dumb. There's really a lot of his arguments, there's not a way they're just stupid. They don't make any, I never read them. So like, I kind of make a point of reading people that I disagree with sometimes, who I say something really stupid. I'll go look at the rest of their Twitter account or other articles. I'd say 2 out of 3 times I realize, you know what, actually, I don't really agree with them, but they do make some good points about certain things that might even change my mind here and there in their work. I look at Greenwald and no, it's 100% garbage, you know?
Well, this is I'm revealing the deep trauma that caused Greenwald to block me was that I said in a thread in which he was not LinkedIn, so he was name searching. He's not a real journalist. And he's a lawyer, and that's how he came up. A lawyer turned blogger who had this giant story land in his lap. So he makes a lawyer's arguments where it's and that used to be, his blog posts used to have 17 updates where it's here's the latest little iteration of it. And so as I understand him, he makes the arguments that as you would to a jury. And so they don't always need to be internally consistent. It's you just need to convince them enough
right
that you'll get the not guilty verdict or whatever. I mean, he was,
he's a lawyer. He's very similar to Jonathan Turley in a lot of ways with his arguments. Yeah. They're not internally consistent at all.
Yeah, he's trying to win the court case kind of thing, not sort of actually convince someone. But yeah, and his but I'm glad that the conventional wisdom, at least within certain sectors of online, has caught up with my thinking that this guy sucks and is a baleful presence on the.
There's also the thing with him that gets me maybe more than Cillizza. And this, I do think that, so I'm not sure that he does this with China, but some sort of Glenn Greenwald-esque people then defend the stuff about the China's doing to the Uyghurs or things like that. And actually, Glenn Greenwald will defend Putin sometimes and Assad. And just the pure nihilism of that just kind of blows my mind. And it fuels a lot of my tweets, right? Because I feel sometimes the tweets that I write that people like the best are Glenn Greenwald saying some ridiculously nihilistic and stupid thing. And I just am in some ways just blown away by how stupid and nihilistic and
the other part of him is that he's an extreme moralist.
Right.
And very Manichaean in his pronouncements. And so whatever he's talking about, he always, hypes it up. It is so hyperbolic. And this is, the greatest threat to modern society ever. And so he has this both I don't know, he infuses his nuts with very strong moral language and that
which I think
everyone
very common, I'm afraid, for nihilists. So it just kind of blows my mind. I mean, when I read, I feel like when if I'm really feeling a little bit creatively blocked, I can always go look at some Glenn Greenwald or Chris Cillizza tweets and really get some good material.
Okay, so they're your muses in addition to being
my muses. I would
noirs.
Yeah. Because I get disappointed, right? I used to initially, like I said, when I started off, probably my big bet noir at the time was David Brooks, and now I go and granted, sometimes he's taking kickbacks to talk about something at Aspen or something, and that's
right.
Half the time I go and he's just saying some reasonable thing in favor of reparations or in favor of Joe Biden's voting bill. And it doesn't really get me going,
Yeah. I mean, Brooks is certainly an interesting figure. And I did read him consistently for a long time and then sort of fell off, but he's sort of he's a communitarian. He actually does believe things. That's sort of
right.
A dividing line in the punditocracy is between people who actually do have beliefs and people who don't. And Brooks clearly does and cares and sees his role as trying to knit the torn American fabric back together. Maybe his solutions are not the right ones, but he seems to, I don't know, be coming from a good place currently.
I definitely view things now in terms of people who have beliefs versus people who have no beliefs. And I think it's a real distinction. I don't think I used to understand what a big distinction that was. I think that this is something that Trump really illuminated.
Oh, for sure, because Trump has no belief beyond his own greatness and that he's the best and knows everything, et cetera. And the fact that so many people went along with him through all that, it was just a cult of personality. It really revealed certain, certain things about, what, plenty of people don't actually care about policy that just care about like a shared enemy or being on one side and aligning against the other one. So maybe we're about at the end of our time. Do you see? But one last question: do you see any difference since Biden has come in? Are we reverting to sort of the Obama era media sphere?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Yeah, which makes me feel much more at home because that's what it's been like most of my life, right? So, yeah, so I think it's reverted now to mostly concern trolling Biden.
Yeah,
I think it used to be mostly about both siding whatever insane thing Trump was doing and trying to come up with some justification for it or why his critics were just as bad. That to me was the anti-Trumpism for me was the dominant theme of Trump era political reporting. And now I think it's mostly back to concern trolling Democrats, which is what they feel most comfortable doing. And it's what I spent most of my life reading. So I feel much more back at home now.
Okay. So it is sort of like, not nature is healing, but like the crisis is over and we're back to
we're back to talking about what Larry Summers thinks about inflation and thing I've been those kinds of things.
The political press wants us to believe that the fate of the infrastructure bill is like this huge important thing, and from my perspective, it's real. Like it could pass or not. Like the important things are defeating the virus and having normal life return. And once that happens, people are not going to care as much about politics. And the Trump era was this aberration where it felt like you needed to be plugged in all the time because a crazy thing could happen at any moment. But half the time those crazy things didn't actually mean anything, but you forgot about it 72 hours later because there'd be another crazy thing. And so just returning to a level of normalcy, politics is receding from our lives. And there's not this sociopath, who's trying to get our attention all the time. This is all like good. And whether, from my perspective, like it would be better if the infrastructure bill passes, but like if it doesn't, this is like life continues. And
that's how I see it. That's how I see it for New York Times reader world, right? I think unfortunately, there's a segment of the Trump supporters who have been truly radicalized and are thinking about QAnon 24/7 and stuff. So I don't think it's necessarily receded for the really hardcore Trump supporters. But I think it has receded for your average New York Times reader.
Yes, that makes sense. And it's I have no idea. You would think after January 6th that the spell would have broken for the QAnon type people, but it clearly didn't. And it's sort of like that when prophecy fails idea that the second coming is always like just in the distance. We can barely glimpse it. We have to keep working for it. Okay. Why don't we end things there? So the account, once again, the link will be below. DougJ Balloon, all one word. And you can follow New York Times Pitchbot. It's 98% your jokes and you're retweeting bad headlines and other such things. Occasionally you do break character and for your own statements. But I encourage people to follow the account and get your perspective on what's right or wrong about the media. Is there anything else you want to plug or anything like that?
No, thanks a lot for having me.
Okay, well, thank you for coming on, and thanks to our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.